we would like to call Max Fortuny to the stand.
Okay.
I sent it to you.
Oh, well, okay.
You don't have to use it. I'm not really using it like reading
Don't
through.
use paper, let's just go.
Yeah.
Go.
Alright.
Yeah, dump the paper.
There's-
Why do you?
Because we changed this last night, but we don't have to, as long as you feel comfortable
You
with
know it.
You know
policies
it.
and
Go.
everything. Okay. I am gonna take this thing. Okay. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Max Fortuny.
Where are you from, Max?
I'm from right here in Steelton.
What do you do for a living?
I own Max Petunia, I own Petunia LLC, which operates Montana Max's Good Time Saloon, and that's a whole bunch of nothing saying I just run Montana Max's Good Time Saloon, which everyone calls Max's.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Max's?
Max's is just pretty much my pride and joy. I started it over 15 years ago now, and it really focuses on, Steelton's a college town, so it really focuses on college kids, attracting them, having a safe, fun, and enjoyable atmosphere for them.
What's the atmosphere like in general at Max's?
It's just fun and really great place to come hang out. We have arcade games, we have prizes people can win, we have specials that really attract college kids.
What kind of specials do you offer?
Specifically, our most popular one is Mexican Mondays.
What is Mexican Mondays?
It's just a night, obviously Monday night, that we have specials on 15 different food items. We give out free chips and salsa. We also have 2 drink specials on our pricier drinks, and obviously that attracts the college kids a lot, and we try to make sure our training is all good for that.
What kind of training do you use at Montana Max's?
We bring in outside consultants that train in TIPS, which stands for Training for Intervention Procedures.
How often do you hold the training?
We bring in those outside consultants every 6 months.
Who's present at these trainings?
All new staff, and then also myself or our general manager.
Now, if someone's hired in between that 6-month period, what training and policies do you use for new members and new hires?
Well, we don't let them run loose or anything like that. We also have these policies that govern every employee that works at the bar, and we make sure that they know those policies, they follow veteran servers, and like I said, we've been in business for 15 years. We don't hire just any random person off the street. We hire veteran servers because we can get those people to work at our bar.
Permission to approach, Your Honor.
You may.
What did I just hand you?
You handed me a copy of our policies and procedures.
Now, with your staff, if they don't follow these policies and procedures, what happens to them?
Well, they get fired, or we can get fined.
What kind of staff do you have at Max's?
We have cooks, we have the bartenders, we have servers, we have bouncers for anything happens, and we also have additional staff that comes in when it's particularly busy that pretty much are shot girls. We call them Mrs. Cheese girls.
How often do they work?
On an as-needed basis, just whenever it's very busy, like BCS National Championship game to be specific.
So if they aren't there during the 6-month training, what training do the shot girls specifically receive?
They receive the same type of training that the other employees do. They follow veteran servers, they know our policies, and they know what happens if they don't follow those policies.
And what policies specifically do the shot girls have when it comes to selling their shots?
They don't make shots, they're pre-poured. They're only allowed to sell 1 shot per customer, and to not do anything that is out of line with our policies.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about your policies. What do your policies say about keeping track of BAC levels of your patrons?
Keeping track of the specific BAC level is just unreasonable, because then we have to bring a breathalyzer to every person before we serve them. Have you ever seen that happen anywhere?
types of factors do you look for to check on intoxication when it comes to your patrons?
Changing behavior, just how they're acting in the bar, and just watching them loud and boisterous speech. If they're
I want to talk a little bit about the change in behavior. What was going on that night specifically at Max's?
Well, it was Mexican Mondays, and then additionally, it was the BCS National Championship game, which the Steelton University was playing in.
Now, when it comes to observing behavior in the football game, how did you use your policies that night? Or how did that night affect you using your policies?
Well, obviously, this is the BCS National Championship game is the largest game in college football of the year. So people are cheering, people are down when people fumble and stuff like that. So people are all over the place. So the changing behavior doesn't work as well, but you can just kind of tack that on top of what's going on in the bar and see how people are really being affected by alcohol at all.
Now, who came into your bar that night?
Person that comes to mind most was Al Overton.
And over the course of the night there, what did you observe about him?
Well, at first he came in and him and his group indicated that it was his 21st birthday. So I made sure to have I indicated to my staff to keep an extra eye on him to make sure.
Why didn't you ask him to leave after you learned it was his 21st birthday?
Well, it's a college town, so if we asked every 21st birthday party to leave, we wouldn't be in business at all.
So after he said this and came in, you said you instructed your staff to watch him. What did you and your staff observe over the course of the night?
We observed them from 10:30 to when Al was asked to leave early in the night before Al's 21st birthday. He wasn't drinking at all. At midnight, he had 4 shots and a beer, and then the incident happened with Miss Mischievous Girls.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that incident?
Well, his group of friends accused him or his group of friends broke one of the Miss Mischievous Girls and then blamed it on Al, and that's when his behavior became kind of angry.
What do you mean by angry? What did he do that indicated that to you?
Well, we got in a fight with those friends. I mean, they were accusing him of something that we take pretty seriously.
And what happened after that?
Well, he intentionally knocked over this tray of drinks, and we just had to start asking him to leave.
Now, with your policies, what do your policies say about angry guests?
That they need to go. They're not allowed in our bar.
So why did you have the bouncers remove Al from your bar?
Because this angry attitude that he was having, he needed to go at that point.
Now, what do your policies say about offering food to patrons in the bar?
I mean, obviously people buy food all the time, but when a person is intoxicated, specifically physically intoxicated, we offer them free food to kind of keep them in the bar for a little bit longer to make sure they don't get out with that high VAC.
Why didn't you offer Al any free food?
Well, he wasn't physically intoxicated, so he didn't need the additional food. Plus, we have free chips and salsa everywhere, so he could have had some of that if he really wanted something.
Now, when Al was leaving, what did you observe as the bouncers were escorting him out of the bar?
Observed him leaving. He was fairly angry still, and he held up his hands. He was waving his keys around, and he left
Why didn't you call a cab at that point?
because he said he was going to Michigan Mike's. He was down the road. He was angry. He wasn't intoxicated, so there was no reason to call a cab.
What else could you have done that night to prevent this from happening?
Nothing.
No further questions.
All right. Cross exam.
Yes, Your Honor. This incident with Al Overton occurred during your Mexican Monday, right?
Yes, it did.
And Mexican Monday is, like you just said on your direct, it's where you attract the college kids, and they come for the cheap drinks, among other things, right?
That is specifically among other things, we have a lot more specials on food and the such than the drinks. So,
And it was also the BCS championship game, right?
well, it wasn't our PCS national championship game. That just occurs.
It was the BCS national championship game, correct?
Yes, it was.
And it'd be fair to say that your bar was crowded.
Yeah, it was.
So crowded that it was almost 30 people over the fire code limit, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And once we became aware of that, we took measures to alleviate that situation.
Now, in order to compensate for this large crowd, you had your shot girls working that night, your Miss Mischievous girls, right?
Yes, like I said, when there's extra people there, we bring in extra staff to make sure the restaurant is fully staffed.
And speaking of shots, it's your understanding that when Al Overton and his friends came in, they were planning to take 21 shots for Al's 21st birthday.
Yeah, a lot of people come in saying that for their 21st birthdays, and it doesn't happen. But we did take the extra steps of, I would indicate to my staff to watch out for this group, just in case something like that.
Well, regardless of them taking 21 shots, you personally observed Al drink several shots, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and a beer additionally. So.
Well, I want to talk to you about your policies, your training policies, because isn't it true that your shot girls aren't trained in your tips procedures?
No, they are trained in our tips procedures. If they're there during the 6-month training period, when we bring in those outside consultants.
So your shot girls are not always trained in your tips procedures, correct?
They're not always trained in our tips procedures. If they're there when the 6-month consultant comes in, they are trained in it, just like every other employee.
But tips is where your staff learns how to identify visibly intoxicated patrons, right?
That is one of the factors of the tips procedure that we use, but also our policies and procedures regulate any alcohol service that goes on in Montana Maxes.
And tips is also where you would learn how to determine if someone is driving, correct?
Again, that's a factor for the tips training. That's why we bring in these consultants. They're good. Also, we have our policies and procedures that we follow.
Maxis tries to train its staff and tips every 6 months, right?
Yes, that's how often we bring them in.
So if it had been 5 months since the last training, your new people wouldn't have gotten that training, correct?
They would have gotten the training when the next time the quality tips people came in.
So there's a chance that your servers aren't trained, correct?
They're trained in our policies and procedures, and then when the outside consultants come in every 6 months, they're trained in tips.
Well, it's not your waitresses and waiters that are serving these shots, are they?
The shot girls sell shots as well. The bartenders can sell shots as well.
So Al and his buddies were getting shots from your untrained girls, weren't they?
They're trained in our policies and procedures.
But not in
They're not trained
tips.
in tips unless they're there when the quality tips people come in.
And aside from your estimate, you have no way of knowing how many shots Al Overton actually drank, do you?
I mean, I observed them through the night and I saw what I saw.
But you have no way of exactly knowing, do you?
Not exactly. We kept our staff watching him. We made sure nothing out of the ordinary happened. And when he became angry, we asked him to leave.
Permission to set up the courtroom.
Yes.
Which I should have done at the very beginning. Now, Max, even though your policies state you are required to count the number of drinks a guest has, no one counted the number of drinks I had that night, did they?
Our staff keeps track of what goes on in our bar. We made sure that Al didn't become visibly intoxicated, and I can say that with confidence.
This could easily be done by using bar tab receipts, correct?
That can be done if the person is staying in one position. Additionally, when someone's wandering around, the best way to do it is by observing their behavior.
That's right, because people were all over the place that night, weren't they?
I mean, it was a national championship game, and it was Mexican Mondays. Yeah, they were all over the place.
And you never saw a receipt. You never saw a receipt of how many drinks Al drank that night.
No, I never personally saw a receipt.
But But you did personally see him drink at least 4 shots in a beer, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and that's why we used the 7.32.
And it's possible that he could have gotten other shots that you didn't see, correct?
I guess that's possible.
And it's possible that his friends could have given them their shots for his 21st birthday, isn't it?
Again, that's possible, but we train our staff to make sure people don't become excessively intoxicated. And we used our policies. I'm confident in our policies, and I'm confident in my staff.
And it's true that observing behavior is one of the best indicators of intoxication, correct?
Yes, it is.
And you'd agree with me that Al suddenly getting into a fight with his best friends in a crowded bar is a change in behavior?
Like I said earlier, he was being accused of something that we take pretty seriously in our establishment, and he got angry about that, and it was unfortunate, but when someone gets angry in our place, we have to ask them to leave. It's for safety concerns.
And you'd agree with me that screaming and yelling at your bouncer would be loud and rude, right?
Yes, we had asked him to leave, and he became increasingly mad about that.
Now, it's also in your policies that impaired motor coordination is one of the most obvious signs of intoxication,
Yes, I mean, that's what's in our policy.
which would include things like tripping, stumbling, spilling drinks.
Yes, that's in our policy.
And it's also true that Al Overton spilled multiple trays of drinks while he was in your bar, correct?
Yes, he did. He intentionally knocked over the drink there. There's a big difference between that and impaired motor coordination.
And even though it's not in your policies and procedures, you'd agree with me that vomiting is a very good indicator of intoxication, correct?
Yes, it would be, and
And Al Overton vomited while in your bar, didn't he?
yes, he did, and I was under the understanding that that was caused by some food poisoning that he had, not because of the amount of alcohol that he had. I observed him, he wasn't intoxicated, he was angry, and we had to get him out.
So, after vomiting, fighting with his friends, and yelling at your bouncers, knocking over trays of drinks, you let him leave your bar, didn't you?
We asked him to leave because he was angry and was causing a problem in our place. I'm very sorry for what happened after he left our establishment, but we had to get him out that night. He wasn't intoxicated though.
As he waved his car keys in the air and said he was going to another bar. You did nothing to stop him, did you?
We asked him to leave because he wasn't intoxicated.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Yes, rather briefly. Do you see from there, or would you like to step down? Or you have your own copy of policies? What do your policies say? What do your policies say about anger and the absorption of alcohol?
Anger specifically reduces the absorption of alcohol.
And what does your policy 7.6 specifically say about angry patrons?
When a person becomes agitated but not intoxicated, make every effort to remove the guest as soon as possible.
Why did you remove Al that night?
Because he was agitated, he was angry, he was causing a problem, but he was not intoxicated. Sorry.
That's it. No further questions?
All right, witness may step down. Does the defense have any other witnesses it wishes to call?
Yes, Your Honor, this time we would call Dr. Gene Martin.
All right,
Emphasis on doctor.
doctor. Anyone have a iPhone cable?
Yeah, I
More than
I think there's a charger in that.
there
I
was
have
a
the-
lot there.
Well, I think there's a portable.
The newer one.
That's why it's the base.
That's the
Six.
shittiest cross that I've ever done.
Just need a lightning.
Your Honor, while we prepare this witness, we have
Like
to
10%.
Yeah, I'm on low power.
The speech coach, she freaks out when she's at like 25, she's like, I gotta plug in. I'm
Oh,
like,
I forgot it like below 40. Although my battery's not on it, like it jumps up and down all it. Like if I plug it in, it'll jump like 12%. I'm like, that's not right. I need to recalibrate it.
"What is this?"
Yes.
You see that?
No. Yes.
My dad was calming down, but I called that insurance company last night.
Did you find any information?
Yeah.
Who's the lawyer?
Sons.
Uh,
So it does the trick.
Yeah, it's fun.
Dr.
That's like
Malkin,
me.
Would you please state your full name for the jury?
Hi, my name is Jean Malkin.
Where are you from, Dr. Malkin?
Well, I went to school here at,
so I can see the witness, please?
Where are you from, Dr. Malkin?
I went to school here in Stilton State, for undergrad and graduate school, and I fell in love, so I haven't left since.
All right. You mentioned school. What type of degrees do you have?
When I was at Stilton State for undergrad, I double majored in pharmacy and hospitality. I then continued to get my master's degree in toxicology, and then I also attended Stilton State to earn my PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry in 2000.
All right. And with those degrees, what do you do for a living?
I'm a consultant in the fields of toxicology and hospitality management. I consult large corporations in the hospitality industry about how the body processes alcohol, reasonable policies that they should implement in their service of alcohol, and also how to look at blood alcohol concentration levels in a customer.
And what type of businesses employ you to do this work?
Currently, I'm employed with Buffalo Wild Wings. I travel nationwide and even several of their businesses up in Canada to give training sessions to their employees and to advise them on specific policy measures that they should implement at the local level.
And have you worked anywhere else before Buffalo Wild Wings?
I did. I worked for a hotel chain called the Westin Hotels, and that's where I spent a majority of my career. I was with them for about 14 years, and a lot of the Westin hotels have bars inside of them, so they also need the training of how to determine if a person's intoxicated and the proper reasonable procedures to take if they are.
And why are you here today, Dr. Malkin?
I'm here today because I was asked to come in and discuss the blood alcohol concentration of Al Overton and whether or not Montana Max employees knew or should have known of any intoxication Al may have displayed.
What opinions have you been asked to give on training techniques?
I've also looked at the training methods that Montana Max implements to see if they were sufficient and adequately given throughout the course of the business.
And what materials did you review?
I reviewed all the depositions in the case, as well as several documents, social media postings. Specifically, the area I focused in on the most was Montana Max's policies and procedures, in addition to my experience in training in the fields of tips technique, stops technique, and all the other additional training I acquired through my schooling.
In analyzing all this material, did you apply adequate principles and methods in your analysis?
Absolutely, I always do.
And without giving us your opinion, can you tell us, have you formed an opinion in this case?
I have formed an opinion.
At this time, defense would tender Dr. Malkin as an expert in the fields of hospitality and the service of alcohol.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, she will be so qualified.
Dr. Malkin, you stated that you formed opinions in this case. Can you tell us what are those opinions?
Well, my first opinion is that Al Overton's blood alcohol concentration could not have possibly reached to a level that would have indicated that he was intoxicated to the employees of Montana Max's. In addition to that, I found that Montana Max's trainings on identifying the intoxication were proper and adequate.
Let's start with the training techniques. What training technique did Montana Max's employ?
Montana Max employs the TIPS technique, and that's an acronym for Training Intervention Procedures. It focuses on training employees to intervene when customers have had too much to drink.
And how common is this TIPS technique?
It's pretty common. There's other techniques such as the STOPS technique, but the TIPS technique is absolutely adequate, and it's one of the leading industry training techniques.
What training technique do you employ in your work?
I employ the TIPS technique. I strongly believe in it, and I think it is a very satisfactory way of teaching employees how to identify intoxicated customers.
And which employees were trained in the TIPS technique at Montana Max's on the night of January 7th?
Well, several of the employees have been through the training of tips by a certified tips trainer. Montana Max implements trainings every 6 months, so several of the employees were trained in that. Some of the employees had not been trained by a certified tips trainer, but they shadowed the other employees who had been, as well as been informed on the policies, which is a mirror image of what tips training discusses.
And how often did these training sessions occur?
They happened every 6 months, which was completely sufficient for any business.
And what's your opinion about the number of employees that were trained?
There were several employees who were trained. I only found that a handful hadn't been trained by the certified tips trainer.
And how common is that in your industry?
It's very common. We can't have certified tips trainers come in every time we make a new hire. So some of the new employees would not have the certified tips training. However, they would have had other instruction or training based off the policies and shadowing programs like Montana Max's.
What's your opinion about the number of employees that were working that night?
Based off reviews of the depositions, it looked to be as if there were 8 shop girls who were working at Montana Max's, as well as several waitresses, servers, and bartenders who were behind the bar.
Is that an adequate amount of people based on the number of people that were in the bar that night?
It seemed to be as if Montana Max was actually overstaffed for that night, and that may have been due to the National Football Championship game that was going on and the large crowds that attended.
Dr. Malkin, I want to move to your second opinion. How did you determine that opinion?
My second opinion about Al Overton's blood alcohol concentration was formed based off of a calculation I did of Al Overton's blood alcohol.
What factors do you consider in that calculation?
Well, we have to consider the factor of Al Overton's weight, as well as the number of drinks that Al consumed throughout the course of the night.
Could you explain to the jury how you did all these calculations?
It's a little bit complicated and I have to use a chart, so if you don't mind, I would like to use the whiteboard to show the math.
Absolutely, Your Honor. We have permission to have Dr. Malkin step down and use the demonstrative.
Yes.
Dr. Malkin, you can stand right there. Dr. Malkin, can you tell us what are we looking at here on your right hand side?
This is a blood alcohol concentration chart. It's nationally recognized and it came directly out of Montana Max's own policies and procedures.
And what factors are shown on that chart?
Well, as you can see, along the y-axis, we have drinks. This is the number of drinks that are consumed throughout the course of the night that I discussed that I took into account for my calculations. Also along the x-axis, we have the body weight of the person consuming those drinks in pounds.
How much did Al Overton weigh on the night of January 7th?
Based on Al Overton's own deposition, he weighed 225 pounds.
How many drinks did Al Overton have that night?
Again, Al Overton admitted to having 5 to 6 shots as well as nursing a beer throughout the night. Taking into worst case scenario that Al had 6 shots and 1 beer, that would be a total of 7 drinks.
All right, and what number of drinks did you apply on this chart?
Well, are we doing 7 or are we doing the 5 calculation? Sorry, because okay. Well, 7 isn't actually the number that we plug into this chart. You see, the body is designed to naturally process alcohol. The liver actually removes a drink every hour that you drink. So we know that Al was at the bar anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. This would mean that the liver would discount for 2 drinks over the course of that time. So the number we would actually use is 5.
Objection, Your Honor.
She's saying that it would have removed 2 drinks after 2 hours. However, this chart has already taken into account 1 hour of drinking.
What's your response to that?
Your Honor, Dr. Malkin is the expert on this chart. I'm not even sure what this chart says. If counsel has a problem with her testimony, he's certainly allowed to cross-examine her on that issue.
I agree, overruled.
So what number did you use on this chart, Dr. Malkin?
So now we have to look at 225 and 5 drinks. And if we go over here to the chart, we can see that 225 is not one of the categories. So we're gonna have to look at 2 columns. We're gonna have to look at the 220 column and the 240 column, which will provide us a range. Now we go along the y-axis to 5 drinks and come across to our columns, and we find that Al Overton's BAC was anywhere from 0.06 to 0.07.
Dr. Malkin, even assuming that we don't discount for time, what would Al Overton's BAC have been during the night?
If we didn't discount for the 2 drinks that the liver would naturally remove, then we would be at 7 drinks. And if we now go down the y-axis to 7 and over, we would be at 0.10 to 0.09.
Dr. Malkin, why are these numbers significant?
These numbers are significant because they're nowhere near the blood alcohol concentration that's needed to display signs of intoxication.
And when would Al Overton's blood alcohol content reach this level?
He would have to have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.15 to show any signs of intoxication.
And when would he have reached the 0.06 to 0.07 range?
He would have reached this range shortly after leaving Montana Max's.
Let's talk about the timeline a little bit. What time did Al Overton begin drinking?
Sure. I'm actually going to track Al Overton's BAC along with the time. Al Overton started drinking at 12 o'clock.
And what time did he leave Montana Max's?
He spent about an hour and a half to 2 hours at Montana Max's. So he left Montana Max's at around 1:30 or 2 o'clock. And I'm going to indicate Montana Max with an MN.
And what was Al Overton's BAC at this time?
Al Overton's BAC was what we calculated here over here on the chart. Anywhere from a 0.06 to a 0.07.
Dr. Malkin, what time did the accident occur?
The accident occurred at 2:30.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, Dr. Malkin has reviewed all the facts in this case and is just testifying to what she's reviewed. If you'd like me to lay more foundation, I'll be happy to do that.
What is the speculation?
She's speculating to when the accident occurred. While she is an expert in hospitality and service of alcohol, speculating about when the accident occurred would be way outside of her expertise.
Is it contained in the materials she reviewed?
Yes, Your Honor, and as I said, I'll be happy to lay that.
Just lay the foundation.
How do you know that the accident occurred at 2:30?
Well, there was an accident report written up, and it told us that the time of the accident was 2:30, and this is vital to my calculations in determining the timeline of the BAC.
And what was Al Overton's BAC when the accident occurred?
Well, that's the problem. We don't know.
What type of measurements were taken of Al Overton's BAC after the accident?
After the accident, Al Overton was administered a breathalyzer, and the breathalyzer indicated that Al Overton had a BAC of 0.12.
Dr. Malkin, .12 is a large leap from .06.
It is.
What in your review of the materials indicates this large leap in blood alcohol?
Based on the materials I reviewed, we found that Al Overton was arrested with a purple stain on his shirt. There was also a purple malt liquor found in Al Overton's vehicle. The only possible way to jump from a .067 to a .12 is to consume more alcohol. So the only explanation is that that half-empty bottle of alcohol in Al Overton's car was consumed by him after he left Montana Max's and before he was given the before the accident occurred.
Thank you, Dr. Malkin. I have no further questions for you at this time.
Your Honor, we would ask to preserve both of these demonstratives for closing arguments.
You never said 3:30.
What's that?
No one testified to 3:30.
I know.
Sorry.
I was gonna ask, but you're already writing it.
You need to.
Your testimony just focused some on Al possibly drinking in his car after he left,
Yes,
that he may have had some bad dog while he was in his car.
yes.
But you never mentioned anything about bad dog in the report that you supplied to the court today, did you?
No, because my analysis was based off his blood alcohol concentration at the time he was at Montana Max's. So the consideration of additional alcohol afterwards only came into court today when we were discussing the full timeline.
Okay. But you did discuss his blood alcohol level at 3:30
Yes, there
And,
was a breathalyzer.
and at 1:30 to 2.
Yes,
and
that's
you're-
when he left Montana Max's.
And you're claiming that this bad dog was drank somewhere in between here.
Correct.
Okay, and a lot of your testimony was based on Al Overton's BAC.
BAC as well as the TIPS training.
And you calculated this BAC by using this chart right here.
Yes, I did.
This chart that says that it does not guarantee a specific BAC.
Absolutely not. That's why the breathalyzer would be a better indicator.
And according to the defendant's own policies, it says that this is only a guide,
Yes, it's only a guide.
and that there are other factors that may affect BAC.
There's other factors that may affect the absorption rate of alcohol, but the actual numbers of the BAC would not be affected other than the two factors that we discussed on the chart.
So the defendant's policies are wrong when it says there are other factors that may affect BAC?
There's other factors that would affect the absorption rate for BAC to peak, but the actual numbers of BAC are only affected by the two factors indicated on the chart.
Okay, and you did this by taking his weight
Yes.
and the number of drinks he had,
Yes.
and you determined the number of drinks he had from Al Overton's own deposition.
Yes, I did.
And his own deposition said that he didn't drink any bad dog in his car.
He says that he didn't, however, there was other evidence to say that he did. The stains on his shirt that matched the same alcohol that was contained in his vehicle.
Didn't he say that those stains were due to a shot that he had taken inside the bar?
He did say that, however, there's no evidence to corroborate that testimony. Neither Montana Max nor any other patron said that there were the same colored drinks served at the bar.
So if Al weighed between 220 and 240 pounds, he was 220 pounds, he would have had to have drank 10 shots of liquor to reach a BAC of 0.15.
That's correct.
Well, that's only after 1 hour, though. He was there for 2 hours.
Correct.
So he would have to drink more than 10, maybe 11 shots of hard liquor in order to reach a BAC of 0.15.
It depends on the time frame of when he consumed those drinks, but yes, it could be.
So he would have to drink that much to show visible signs of intoxication.
Yes.
But you would agree that the BAC isn't the only way to determine whether someone is intoxicated.
There are other factors that can help determine if a person's intoxicated, correct?
In fact, the policies say that the best way is to just observe the person's behavior.
One of the best indicators of intoxication is a person's behavior, absolutely.
You want to look to see if someone's becoming rude,
Yes,
if someone's spilling drinks,
yes.
and if someone's vomiting.
Not sure about the vomiting one, but the other ones, yes, for sure.
You don't think vomiting could be a sign of intoxication?
It could, but there's a lot of factors that could cause someone to vomit, so it's not a decisive factor in intoxication.
And even though I was exhibiting these signs, you were able to come up with an excuse for every single behavior.
It's not an excuse. It was corroborated by evidence throughout the facts that I reviewed.
You didn't think it was a physical sign of intoxication when Al knocked over a whole tray of drinks.
No, it seemed as if he tripped and knocked it over. It seems as if he intentionally knocked
You didn't think it was a physical sign of intoxication when Al vomited inside of the bar?
No, there was evidence to support
Your Honor,
that.
asked and answered.
Overruled.
There was evidence to support that Al had some bad food and that his vomiting was caused due to stomach problems from the bad food, not the alcohol.
And you didn't think it was a visible sign of intoxication when Al was getting kicked out of the bar and he yelled that Max's was a shitty excuse for a bar?
Again, he was simply angry that he was getting kicked out of the bar on his 21st birthday, which is reasonable.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, any redirect?
No, Your Honor, no redirect at this time.
Okay, witness may step down. Any other witnesses from the defense?
No, Your Honor, no more.
Does the defense rest?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense officially rests at this time.
Okay.
And we would like to renew our appointment as a matter of law, Your Honor.
Okay, anything new on that?
No, Your Honor, we submit that they have still failed to establish the causal link of the negligence standard that they are trying to assert in this case.
Figure it out previously.
Okay, I will deny that motion. Ready for closing?
Yes, Your Honor. Brief moment to set up the courtroom.
Yes. It was a good cross.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and I'll say it.
What do you need?
I need the bird.
Goes on forward. And that goes on the right.
There's an old story about a man who opened up a store right in the middle of town. And in order to get people to come into his store, he decided he was going to get a lion as an attraction, just to get people in to see what he was selling. So he got the lion, and he got a cage for the lion, and put it right in the middle of his store. And it worked. People started coming in, and business was good for him. But one day, the lion escaped from his cage, and it killed someone. When the townspeople came to the store owner, accusing him of what the lion did, the store owner said, "Well, it's not my fault. I did everything I was supposed to do. I put the lion in a cage like any reasonable person would have done." But that doesn't matter. If you bring a lion into town, the law says it's your lion. It's your responsibility, and if it gets out, you're liable. While we're not accusing the defendant of bringing a lion into his bar, he brought in something that's arguably more dangerous. He brought in college-age kids, he would pack them into his bar, and he'd serve them cheap alcohol. Well, one day, one of these kids got loose, and they injured Quinn Chase. Earlier today, you heard my co-counsel talk about what this case is about. And what this case is about is responsibility, reasonability, and liability. And I want to talk to you about that first prong there, responsibility. You see, on the night of January 7th into the early morning hours of January 8th, Montana Max's Good Time Saloon, it was the place to be. The national championship game was going on. It was Mexican Monday. The alcohol was cheap, and the shop girls were out to make sure everybody had enough booze. Montana Max's was packed that night. There were nearly 30 people over maximum capacity. And into this madness walked Al Overton. He was there to celebrate his 21st birthday. He was there to take some shots, and he was there to get drunk. And as you heard, over the course of this trial, it was the defendant's responsibility to make sure that guests weren't overserved. It was the defendant's responsibility to make sure that all of their employees were properly trained. And it was the defendant's responsibility to make sure a visibly intoxicated person wasn't allowed to just walk out the front door and get into their car. But what happened instead? Instead, you heard that when Al and his friends came in, bragging about how Al was going to do 21 shots in honor of his 21st birthday, they let him stay, and they kept serving him alcohol. When you learn that instead of training all of their employees properly, they only train their employees twice a year. And if they were to hire someone in the interim, they didn't bother to make sure they were trained. They'd just wait until the next training session, and then let them get trained by certified instructors. And you also heard that on this night, Al Overton got shots from these untrained shop girls, proceeded to get into a fight with his own friends, knocked over a tray of drinks, threw up inside the bar. And what did the defendant do? He didn't follow his own policies by making sure Al didn't leave that night. No. He kicked him out. He made him leave. He did the most irresponsible thing you could do in that situation. So when you go back to deliberate, you're going to be given a verdict form, just like this one. The first question that this form is going to ask you is, was the defendant negligent? And that brings me to the second prong of what my co-counsel told you earlier, reasonability. Because negligence is pretty much is essentially whether someone acted like a reasonable person. Negligence is the failure to act like a reasonably careful person would in order to avoid injuries. And you heard today from Sydney Crosby, an expert in hospitality and service of alcohol, and she told you exactly why the defendant acted unreasonably that night. When Al and his friends came in bragging about how he was going to take 21 shots in honor of his 21st birthday, they should have immediately told him to leave. Taking that many shots, drinking that much alcohol is unsafe. No one can drink that much. And while the defendant claims that Al was just bragging and wasn't seriously going to do that, the bar that night was nearly 30 people over maximum capacity, and there was no way that the employees there could have properly monitored every single customer in that bar. And if you can't properly monitor every single customer in that bar, if you know one of those customers is going to be doing something dangerous, like taking 21 shots would be, they have the responsibility to immediately remove that guest. A reasonable bar owner wouldn't let a customer stay inside that bar knowing full well that that customer was going to be acting dangerously. She also told you about Montana Max's shop girls, or mischievous girls as they like to call them, and how they weren't properly trained. They would bring in certified trainers only twice a year, and they wouldn't train these girls on how to properly identify whether someone was intoxicated. They wouldn't train them on how to avoid alcohol-related accidents. A reasonable bar owner would have made sure that every employee was trained, and that they were trained by trainers who were certified in TIPS procedures. But that's not what the defendant did. And she also told you that the defendant failed to act like a reasonable person when he let Al Overton leave that bar that night. See, Al Overton came in there, and the defendant saw him. The defendant knew when Al walked in that he was there to celebrate his 21st birthday. The defendant heard that Al and his friends were planning on taking 21 shots in honor of that birthday. And then subsequently, Al started getting into an argument with his friends. Al threw up. Al got into a fight with his very own friends. And what did the defendant do? He didn't offer him something to drink like his policies say. He didn't call him a cab like his policies say. There was nothing the defendant did that was reasonable that night. And because of that, you need to think about that third prong my co-counsel told you, liability. You need to assign that liability to the defendant. Check yes for question number 1. Question number 2 is going to ask you, was the negligence of the defendant a factual cause of any harm to Quinn Chase? And when you're thinking about that question, just ask yourselves, well, what factual harm means is that the accident would not have happened but for the negligence of the defendant. So when you're thinking about that question, ask yourselves, would this accident have happened if the defendant had told Al and his friends to leave immediately upon hearing that they wanted to take 21 shots? Would this accident have happened if all of the employees were trained properly in the TIPS procedures? And would this accident have happened if, instead of kicking Al Overton out, after he was showing all of these signs that according to their own policies indicated intoxication, and instead of kicking him out, he just called him a cab? Or sat him down and had him sober up by eating some free food and drinking non-alcoholic beverages like the policies say? At the very least, no, they didn't do that. And what's even worse is that the defendant either knew or should have known that Al Overton was going to be driving that night. You heard from the deposition of Al Overton when he was leaving, he waved his keys over his head. And while the defendant claims that he didn't know what that meant, ladies and gentlemen, use your common sense. When someone's leaving, they're waving their keys over their head, it doesn't mean I'm going to walk home. It doesn't mean I have a ride. It means I'm getting in my car and I'm driving away. And did the defendant prevent him from doing that? No, he didn't. Wouldn't a reasonable bar owner at least ask him directly if he had a ride? I know the defendant said that he heard he had a ride, but that was when he was yelling at Max's was a shitty excuse for a bar on his way out. Shouldn't he ask him, hey, do you have a ride? Or maybe just watch as he went out to the parking lot to make sure he wasn't getting behind the wheel of the car. But he didn't do that. And this accident wouldn't have happened if they did. So you can answer yes to question number 2. Which brings us to question number 3. It asked, was Quinn Chase negligent? The plaintiff himself. And there's simply no evidence that anything Quinn Chase did that night was unreasonable. All the evidence showed is that Quinn Chase was sober, he was going under the speed limit through a green light at the time of this accident. And because of that, you can check no for question number 3. And if you do, there's no reason to go to question 4. You can go straight to the last question. But I'll talk to you briefly about question number 4. It asked, was Quinn Chase's negligence the factual cause of any harm to Quinn Chase? Would Quinn Chase have gotten in the accident but for his negligence? So even if you were to find something that Quinn Chase did that night to be unreasonable, would that have contributed to him getting T-boned? Would that contribute to him to getting hit on the broad side of his car as he was going through a green light? There's nothing that Quinn Chase could have done that night to avoid getting T-boned. So you can answer no for question number 4. That brings us to question 5, which asks you to attribute the percentage of harm between the defendant and Quinn Chase. And because there was nothing to indicate Quinn Chase did anything unreasonably that night, you can put a 0 right next to his name and 100 next to the defendant's. You see, it was the defendant's responsibility to make sure that none of the customers caused injuries to themselves or the community. It was the defendant's responsibility to train all of its employees properly. It was the defendant's responsibility to make sure a visibly intoxicated person like Al Overton wasn't allowed to just walk out the door to his car and get behind the wheel and slam into Quinn Chase's car. So after you come back from deliberations and you return your verdict, let the defendant know that just like the man with the lion, it was his drunk customer that got loose. It was his drunk customer that injured someone, and because of that, he's liable. The defendant didn't act reasonably, the defendant didn't act responsibly, and because of that, we need to find the defendant 100% liable. Thank you.
Defense?
Please call.
Yes.
Judge, members of the jury. At the very beginning of this case, Ms. Vaughn stood right here, and she told you that the plaintiff will try to present a case today that is easy as the ABCs. But they're able to present this case that's as easy as ABC because they have based their case on assumptions that ask you to place the blame on Max Petunia by jumping to conclusions. And hopefully now that you've heard the testimony in this case, and you have seen the evidence, you can see that this case is not as simple as the plaintiffs would have you believe it is. This case is not as simple as ABC. And this case is not that simple because the plaintiff has failed to prove to you today that Al Overton was ever visibly intoxicated while he was inside Montana Max's. And even further, they have failed to prove to you that he was ever served a drink after displaying signs of visible intoxication. Now, members of the jury, you've had a chance to hear from Max Petunia today. He stepped right here on the stand, took a note under penalty of perjury, and he told you his story about what happened. And he told you about how sorry he is about what happened to Quinn Chase that night, how he feels awful. And members of the jury, that's something that we can all agree on here. We all feel awful about the accident that Quinn Chase was involved in. But Max also told you how he knows that this accident was not his fault, because he knows his employees were trained properly, and he knows what the law says. And the law says the standard is visible intoxication. And he knows that Al Overton was not visibly intoxicated when he left Montana Max's. And members of the jury, let's talk about the applicable law in this case. What does the law say? See, the plaintiffs have raised a claim under general negligence. And in a few minutes, the judge will instruct you that that means you must determine what a reasonable bar employee would have done under similar circumstances. And what would a reasonable bar employee do? They would follow the law that the state of Stilton has set out for them. The law that I have right here, it says the standard for determining whether somebody should be served a drink is visible intoxication. And if someone is visibly intoxicated, it's only after that point that they should not be served. That is the standard that should apply to your inquiry here today, members of the jury. And since that is the standard, you only need to ask 3 questions in this case. The plaintiff must prove 3 elements of their cause of action. They must prove Al Overton was visibly intoxicated. They must prove that he was served after visibly intoxicated. And then they must prove that being served while visibly intoxicated was the factual and proximate cause of the injuries to Quinn Chase. Members of the jury, they don't just have to prove that to you. They have to prove that to you by a particular standard. That standard is the preponderance of evidence. And that means that they must prove every single element of their claim is more likely than not. Members of the jury, when you go back in that jury room and you start talking about this case, you will find that that is exactly what the plaintiff has failed to prove in their case today. And when you go back in that jury room, you're going to get to take a few things with you. You get to take exhibits that were entered into evidence in this case. You also get to take the jury verdict. The plaintiffs already talked to you about this jury verdict form. And of course, they told you how they want you to fill it out using their assumptions and jumping to conclusions. I've got my own power. And I want to talk to you about how to look at this form a little different. See, question number 1. Was Petunia Enterprises, Max Petunia, was he negligent? Answer yes or no. Members of the jury, in order to answer this question, you must think about the testimony that was presented to you here today. And you must consider that in light of all the facts that we have heard. And to help you understand those facts, we have a timeline. A timeline that Dr. Gene Malkin created for you. A timeline that lays out the undisputed times that each of these things happened. And what do we know? We know that no one disputes Al Overton was ever served a drink before 12 o'clock. And we also know, because it's undisputed, that Al Overton left sometime between the time of 1:30 and 2 o'clock. And based on this timeline, members of the jury, that means that if the plaintiff is going to prove their case to you, if they're going to prove those 3 elements of their cause of action, They must do it within this bracket of time right here, from 12 until 2. They must show you that he was served a drink after being visibly intoxicated within this time. And what witnesses did they put up on that stand that can tell you, I was at Max's between that timeline. I saw him visibly intoxicated, and I saw him served a drink after that. They haven't presented a single witness to you here today who can testify. They brought you Quinn Chase. Quinn Chase sat up there on that stand. But where was Quinn Chase during this timeline? He was at his apartment with 100 of his closest friends drinking cold beer out of a keg. He can't tell you what he saw during that time. And then they brought you Sidney Crosby, their expert, who just happens to own a competing bar down the road from Montana Max's. Sidney Crosby can't tell you what happened during that timeline because she wasn't there. She was probably at Michigan Mike's running the bar the same way that Max Petunia did. And what did she tell you? What facts did she rely on in coming to her conclusion? She agrees. Al Overton weighed around 225 pounds. You've heard her when I asked her up here on this stand. She agrees to the 6 shots. She doesn't dispute how many drinks he had. She doesn't dispute that it was over the course of 2 hours. But you see, these are the same facts that Dr. Malkin, our expert, relied on in forming her conclusion. Yet members of the jury, these 2 experts come to 2 separate conclusions based on all the same data. And what explains this discrepancy? The only thing that can explain that is that Sidney Crosby didn't run the numbers. She never performed the calculations because she's not qualified to do it. She doesn't have a PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry. She can't run these calculations. And she doesn't want to run these calculations because they show that his BAC was nowhere near signs of visible intoxication. But why can't Sidney Crosby bring you that opinion? Because she's biased. She owns a competing bar down the road. And if a judgment is rendered against Montana Max's, and people start going to Michigan Mike's instead of Montana Max's, who is going to benefit from that increase in Michigan Mike's revenue? Sidney Crosby. And for that reason, you should discredit Sidney Crosby's testimony. Now, what witnesses did we bring you in this case, members of the jury? We brought you the only eyewitness you will hear from here today, Max Petunia himself. And what did Max tell you? He told you that between the hours of 12 and 2, and even before then, up to 10:30, he and his staff were watching Al Overton closely, monitoring his alcohol intake to ensure that he did not reach that level of visible intoxication. He told you that at some point, Al did become agitated. And when he became agitated, when he got in an argument with his friends at 2 o'clock, that's when Al Overton was removed from the bar. That's what the policies that the plaintiff has entered into evidence, those policies, Montana Max's policies, they state when a patron becomes agitated instead of intoxicated, they must be removed. That's what Montana Max's did in this situation. And then we brought you Dr. Gene Malkin. Dr. Malkin, who has run these numbers and told you there is no way, based on the science of this chart right here, there is no way that Al Overton was ever near the signs of visible intoxication. Remember, the jury, 0.15 is at the bottom of this chart. Even if you think that there is some discrepancy in the number of drinks that Al Overton was served that night, he doesn't get anywhere near this level of visible intoxication. So members of the jury, when you go to answer question number 1 on this chart, was Max Petunia negligent? Your answer to that question must be no. And when you answer no to question number 1, this verdict form tells you you do not have to answer any more questions. The plaintiff, Quinn Chase, cannot recover, and this case is over. Your inquiry is done. But members of the jury, we can answer the rest of these questions anyways, because that is how badly the plaintiff has failed to prove their case to you here today. And so we're going to answer the rest of those questions. Question number 2, was the negligence of Tuning Enterprises the factual cause of any harm to Quinn Chase? The factual cause. What does that mean? That means that each and every event on this timeline has to be accounted for. And if there is any event that is unknown on this timeline, any event that the plaintiff has failed to prove to you, then that is a break in this causal chain. And what are the unknowns on this timeline? We know how many drinks Al Overton was served while he was in Montana Max's. We know what his BAC was at the time that he left. What we don't know is what Al Overton was doing in his car for an hour to 30 minutes in between the time that he left and the time the accident occurred. We do know that his blood alcohol content was significantly higher after that point. And that means, as Dr. Malkin told you, that Al Overton, angry because he'd been kicked out of the bar on his 21st birthday, sat in his car and he sulked and he chugged that bottle of Bad Dog Malt Liquor until the point where he was ready to drive to Michigan Mike's. And ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, that event is the first break in our causal chain. And because there is a break in that causal chain, when you go to answer question number 2, again, you must check no. And just like you check no to question number 1, when you check no to question number 2, this verdict form again tells you at that point, this case is over. You don't have to answer any more questions. But we're going to go to question number 3 anyways, because question number 3 is about Quinn Chase. Was Quinn Chase negligent? And what do we know about the actions of Quinn Chase on that night? We know that 5 hours before Al Overton ever had his first drink of alcohol, at 7 o'clock, we know that Quinn Chase tapped the keg. But unlike Al Overton, nobody was watching over Quinn Chase during this time. Montana Max's staff, they weren't at Al Overton's house party. They weren't at Quinn Chase's house party, excuse me. And when we had Quinn Chase up on this stand and Miss Barham pushed him on exactly how many drinks he had during that time, he couldn't even give you a straight answer. Members of the jury, after 7 hours of drinking, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Quinn Chase gets behind the wheel of a car and starts driving to what he calls a gate. And not only is he driving, he's talking on the cell phone, going to meet someone for a date. Members of the jury, Quinn sat up here and told you he didn't see anything on a well-lit road, clear night. He didn't see anything. Maybe that's because he was distracted from the amount of alcohol in his system. Maybe that's because he should have been behind the wheel of an automobile. And that's why, when you ask yourself question number 3, we must check yes. And when you check yes to question number 3, you ask if Quinn's negligence was a factual cause of his own accident. And when you consider that, we go back to this chain. We go back to the unknowns. The fact that we don't know how many drinks he has. We don't know what his blood alcohol content was when he got behind the wheel that day. And therefore, we must check yes to question number 4. And if Quinn was a factual cause of his own accident, that means that it is also a break in the timeline of Montana Max's service of alcohol. Montana Max's responsibility. Another break in the timeline. Members of the jury, after you answer these 4 questions, the 5th question will ask you to apportion fault between the parties. And when you are apportioning that fault, I am asking you to consider all of the factors that the plaintiff has failed to prove. Consider the conduct of Quinn Chase. Consider the conduct of Al Overton after he left Montana Access. And consider the final break in this causal chain. The final break in the causal chain that Dr. Malkin provided to you based on hard facts and mathematical calculations that there is no way that Al Overton was visibly intoxicated when he left Montana Access. Members of the jury, as you can see, this case is not as simple as ABC. Because there are a whole lot of moving parts in this case. There are a lot of breaks in this causal chain. And what is the only explanation for the breaks in this causal chain? You can't explain it with assumptions. You can't explain it by placing blame where it doesn't belong. And you can't explain it by jumping. The only explanation for the breaks in this chain are the BAC, the blood alcohol content. The blood alcohol content of Quinn Chase that we will never know because nobody was watching. The blood alcohol content of Al Overton that we know for certain. And the blood alcohol content that leads you to the only verdict that you can find in this case. The verdict that will speak the truth. The verdict that we are asking you to find Max Petito and his business, not life. Thank you.
Any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. The defendant's own policies say that as employees, they are the first line of defense to ensure that customers have a good time, that don't put themselves or other members of the community in danger. But what did you hear instead from the defense? Instead, you heard them trying to shift blame to someone else. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they want to blame the plaintiff himself in this case, Quinn Chase. They want you to think that because he had 5 to 6 drinks over the course of 7 hours, that he was drunk and that contributed to the accident. But you heard from the defendant's own expert that the liver removes 1 drink per hour. So if he had 5 to 6 drinks over 7 hours, he would have had all those drinks removed and then some. And they might want you to think that Quinn Chase talking on his phone contributed to the accident. But you heard he was talking on a hands-free Bluetooth system. And he was going under the speed limit and through a green light at the time of this accident. Nothing that Quinn Chase did contributed to his harm. And then they also wanted to blame Al Overton. They wanted to say that he wasn't drunk while he was in Montana Max's, but that when he went outside to his car, that's when he drank all of the alcohol to get drunk. But you heard from Al Overton's own deposition. Those purple stains on his shirt, those are from the defendant's shots that he served in his bar. And that he didn't drink any of that Bad Dog while he was there. And the defendant also brought their expert in, Dr. Jean Malkin. And she tried to say that there's no way that Al Overton could have been intoxicated, that it was scientifically impossible. She tried to tell you that in order for Al Overton to be exhibiting visible signs of intoxication, he would have had to drink 10 or 11 shots of hard liquor. Does it take that much liquor to start showing visible signs of intoxication? No, it does not. And while the defendant tried to blame everyone they could, they also tried to excuse all the signs of intoxication that Al Overton was exhibiting inside of that bar. Al Overton's throwing up. Well, Max said that one of his waitresses said that she had overheard that Al said his stomach hurt. They want you to think that his tripping wasn't, or spilling the drinks wasn't due to intoxication. They want to say, oh, well, he was mad at his friends because they were trying to accuse him of touching someone. All of these excuses don't negate the fact that, according to the defendant's own policies, the behavior he was exhibiting inside that bar were visible signs of intoxication, and the defendant did nothing to prevent him from leaving that night. They didn't act responsibly, they didn't act reasonably, and because they didn't, you must find them liable. Thank you.
Good job.
Good job.